What's the deal with Joan of Arc? You know, the maid of Let Me Explain? Hey there! Welcome to my channel. Joan of Arc is one of the most famous women in history, but she was also kind of ridiculous. This is 10 minutes. Joan of Arc in 10 minutes! Let's do this! Number 10. Who was Joan of Arc? We don't actually know that much about Joan of Arc's early life. She was born in 1412 in the small village of Domremy, which is near the city of... Her father was a small farmer, and her mother was a peasant. And even though Joan was illiterate, she said that she heard God speak to her many times throughout her childhood, and he told her that he wanted her to help the French win the 100 Years' War against the English. And so at age 16, she set off to find the French king and convince him that God had chosen her to lead the French army. No. 9. Meeting the Duc, Joan traveled to the city of Poitiers and asked to meet the French king, Charles VII. However, the king was reluctant to meet with her because he thought she was just another crazy peasant girl who had delusions of grandeur. But after she predicted that Charles would soon become the king, he decided to take a chance on her, and he gave her an audience. So Joan then convinced the Dauphin that she was truly an instrument of God, and that he should crown her as the leader of his army so they could drive the English out of France. And since Charles was desperate for a good PR move, he agreed. And so, at age 17, Joan of Arc became the military commander of the French army. Number 8. The Siege of... With Joan leading the French troops, they marched toward the city of which was under siege by the English. The English were led by the legendary warrior Sir John Fastolf, who was considered to be unbeatable in battle. But when Fastolf saw Joan riding into battle, he underestimated her, and he lost the battle. And once the English were defeated, Joan continued to lead the French army in several other battles. She was successful in every single one, and with her victories, it seemed like the French were destined to win the war. No. 7. The coronation of Charles VII. After Joan helped lift the siege of and defeat the English in several other battles, she turned her attention back to Paris. At this point, the coronation of Charles VII was still in the future. So she wanted to make sure that nothing would stand in their way. And so she led her army to the city of Reims, which was the traditional site of French coronations. She fought her way into the city and forced the bishop to crown Charles VII as the King of France. So now that Charles was officially the king, he was more open to giving Joan of Arc the recognition that she deserved. And he knighted her and made her a member of his royal court. No. 6. The Battle of Patay. After Charles VII was crowned the King of France, he named Joan of Arc as the governor of the recently liberated city of... But even though she was a military leader and a member of the French royal court, she was still a simple peasant girl at heart. She preferred to live among the common folk than to live in luxury as a member of the royal court. But anyway, while she was governor of the English, returned to the city and laid siege to it yet again. So Joan left the city and joined the French army, and she led them back to Patay, where she decisively defeated the English for a second time. And with her victory at Patay, the stage was set for the final battle between the French and the English at the Siege of Paris. Number 5. The Siege of Paris. After defeating the English at the Battle of Patay, Joan of Arc and the French army marched on Paris, which was still occupied by the English. But as they approached the city, they were met by a relief force of English soldiers who had come to rescue Paris. So Joan and the French were forced to retreat from Paris. And although they had planned to lay siege to the city, they had to wait until the next year to try again. Because winter was coming, and nobody was going to do any serious fighting during the cold season. And so Joan went back to her home village to regroup and wait for spring. No. 4. Betrayal. In the spring of 1430, Joan and the French army returned to Paris and began laying siege to the city. But after several months, the French had failed to capture the city, and Joan knew that she needed to do something desperate if she wanted to turn the tide of the battle. And so she left the siege and traveled to the city of where she planned to raise an army of 10,000 men to help capture Paris. But before she could raise an army, she was betrayed by one of her close friends, a man named Jean de Luxembourg. He sold her out to the English for 10,000 francs. And so the next day, English soldiers surrounded her house and captured her. No. 3. trial and imprisonment. The English took Joan of Arc to the city of Rouen and put her on trial for heresy and witchcraft. Now, the real reason they put her on trial was not because they thought she was a heretic or a witch, but because they didn't want her to inspire the French anymore. And so, they charged her with wearing fancy men's clothing, which was a violation of the modesty laws of the time. They also accused her of seeing visions without consulting the church first, and they said that she had committed heresy by claiming to hear God speak to her. And because Joan was illiterate, she couldn't defend herself in court, and so she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. No, to escape. After sentencing Joan, the English threw her into prison and locked her up. But just 4 days later, the English commander, John Fastolf, had a change of heart, and he ordered that she be released from prison. He felt bad about how she had been treated, and he wanted to make amends. And so he offered her a noble title, a noble salary, and the right to keep whatever treasures she had with her when she was captured. And even though she refused these offers, she did agree to be set free. And so the English released her and sent her back to France. No! One death. After Joan was released, she rejoined the French army and continued the fight against the English, but unfortunately, she was captured again. This time, she was only 20 years old. When the Burgundians captured her, they sold her to the English for 3,000 francs. And since she was more famous now than when she was first captured, the English knew they could get a lot of money from putting her on trial a second time. And so they brought her to the same courthouse in Rouen and put her through the same trial that they had given her before. They charged her with the same things, and she was again found guilty and sentenced to prison. This time, the sentence was worse. Instead of just being thrown in prison, she was burned alive at the stake. Now, some historians say that before Joan was killed, one of her jailers offered her the chance to escape, but she refused. She said she'd rather die than betray her beliefs. And others say that her jailer made her offer up her sword and shield, which she refused to do, so the jailer stabbed her in the head and killed her. Either way, Joan of Arc became a martyr for the French, and her legend only grew bigger after her death. And that's the story of Joan of Arc, the Maid. Do you think Joan of Arc was a hero or a villain or somewhere in between? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And also, remember to smash that subscribe button for more videos. Thank you for watching.